Uh, I will now, therefore, continue with where I had left last. And I had stopped with the idea of the new kind of travel, being developed with the partition of India, and the travel which was intensely, as it were, violent and extremely difficult for a large section of the population. And the story of this travel really is documented in several, you see, novels and so on and so forth. We really do not have any particular travel account per se, but once again dispersed in various narrative modes. Now, therefore, this is one aspect of Indian travel which we should also take a look at. The other thing that I would like to take a look at, and that is where is the last part of my presentation really, is the post-independence travel writing. Now, post-independence travel writing is a problematic category, really, in the sense, again, that it has been extremely diverse, and we have seen the explosion of print, the development of the languages, and therefore, numerous and voluminous travelogues written from every corner of India, as it were. But if I try to sift them out, we'll find that, one of the interesting travel writings that have been made is the travel to the hitherto non-metropolitan locations. Now, I will, of course, do Vishwanath Ghosh's Chai Chai with you, which documents one such travel. But I'd like to mention Pankaj Mishra's Butter Chicken in Ludhiana, which becomes one such travel text, which sort of takes a look at these smaller Indian towns and the stories, the legends associated with them. So within the Indian languages, you see, there have been numerous such texts which have looked at the smaller towns of India and the aspirations and the problems that are faced, and they're being cut off from the other parts. Now, another kind of travel writing, which incidentally I should have mentioned, I did not, my fallacy altogether, came from the British Raj itself, was this, travel writing of the shikar, of the jungle. You see, there are several locations. You see the river, the tirtha, the mountain, and especially the jungle. So you have people like Jim Corbett, Kenneth Anderson, all of them writing about, their experiences of the shikar. But in these experiences of the shikar, you also have an elaborate way of traveling within the jungle. And this tradition, incidentally, in post-independence India and modern travel writing, is carried out in a political context, in the sense that, you have travels into Naxalite country. For example, Shudeep Chakraborty's Red Sun takes a look at, traveling into these very, very difficult places, deprived places, where the travelogue is also deeply implicated in a political exposition of the tale of deprivation, a tale of sort of government oppression. So in that sense, this is a new genre of the travelogue altogether. Now, you, of course, have another group of travelogues which are recently coming out and which we will call horror or disaster kind of travelogues, which travel to, places racked by storms, for example, after the tsunami, travelogues to Andaman and the ways in which these locations have been completely decimated. Andaman, incidentally, has always been one of the zones where travel writers have talked about. You have it right during the independence movement, when Andaman is this, Dipantar, where people are secluded. So their experiences at Andaman. And again, you have, once the partition comes in, people settling down at Andaman and their travels and Rojnamchas, as it were, daily writings on the problems of existence at the Andaman Island. So these two become, ways in which travel writings have functioned in creating certain spaces. Another interesting group of travel writers who've written in the post-independence age have come from the category of Anglo-Indians who have had their education maybe in England but have settled down in India and written their travelogues about these small village mountainous towns. Now, the two major examples of this, of course, are Bill Atkin and Ruskin Bond. Bill Atkin writes about the 7 sacred rivers, and we will be reading Ruskin Bond, who brings, and these Anglo-Indians bring a kind of a very interesting perspective to travel writing, in the sense that they are looking at them as Indians also, but not really, also with a certain kind of a distance, because they're not participating within the Hindu discourse of pilgrimage, but looking at these territories more in terms of ecology. Right. So that is another kind of travelogue that has been recently developing, the ecologically conscious, travel writer who empathizes with the forest and the landscape, and therefore, highlights not what is the human civilization around it, but the marginalized classes, the forest, and the empathetic understanding of the self with nature. So within these narratives, we can find a greater degree of, as it were, self-awareness, ecological awareness, combining with the travel narrative proper. We also have, of course, people like Naipaul who have written about India and who've shared the Western perspectives of India as a darker kind of a place. We have, the more romantic narratives of Pico Iyer, for example. And we have the duo of Amitav Ghosh and, of course, people like Vikram Seth, who have written about Burma, who've written about Tibet, and we've written about Egypt. And these are the truly post-colonial writers of the modern age who are writing in terms of, seeing these locations, these different locations, as having shared histories of oppression, as tracing the silk routes which have now disappeared, and looking at the earlier Indian cosmopolitanisms that once existed, but were gradually subverted by the presence of the British Empire. So in that sense, we have 3 cosmopolitanisms. One, the early cosmopolitanism of the Buddhist religion and the Silk Routes, of which we have very few travelogues. Then a more colonial cosmopolitanism, where Indians are traveling across the world, but as colonial subjects. And the new cosmopolitanism, where Indians are traveling as post-colonial travelers. And of course, one of the major groups, how can I forget, is this journey to America, the sense of arrival, the sense of self-formation, and thereby recording, their sense of having evolved a new second wave of diasporic identity. In many cases, if you look at these diasporic stories, if you look at these tales of, say, for example, Jhumpa Lahiri or the others, you will find that this, journey, this rite of passage from India to America is seen as a rite of arrival, as a passage of arrival into establishment. And therefore, you have an entire glut of travel writings by these people of their arrivals in different locations. As the world has shrunk, you now have, travel writing as an established practice, as an Indian travel writing. So, and an established genre, both, in terms of a book or in terms of an article. So you have now numerous, newspapers, all newspapers, in fact, having a travel section. So it's the Sunday supplement, if you take it in the Telegraph or the Statesman, of individual records of travels to exotic places and Indians traveling there to all corners of the globe, giving you the itinerary, places to see, places to stay. You have the entire, group of Indian travel writers who write the guidebook for it and have dedicated travel magazines. In Bengali, Bhromon is one of the most important magazines, and many of you probably have the Bhromon Shongi back at home. So when you plan for your next travel to Puri, for example, you know what exactly which holiday home to visit, which are the good hotels just beside the seaside, or you know how the Garhwal Mandal Vikas Nidam guest house can be booked. Now, there's one final comment I'd like to make. This is vis-a-vis women traveling. As you will find out that, during the early 20th century, and late 19th and early 20th century, women were seen as within the parda, as not within the antapur, not permitted to travel outwards. You remember it was Satyendranath's wife, Ganodanandini, who first traveled to England and adapted, the kind of Marathi way of wearing the sari and rode a horseback, creating a scandal. But gradually, women did start traveling, especially with their husbands when they went abroad. And this is how, Durgavati comes to write her travelogue. And gradually, you see, with the opening up of Indian society, women start traveling more and more. And therefore, you have not so many travelogues, but now the rise of Indian travelogues written by women who are traveling to different parts of the country, who are traveling professionally, who are traveling as separate, independent travelers, and writing down their strategies, their encounters of travel. So that is another whole contact zone being created. So travel writing in the postmodern age becomes far more dispersed. That's my first point. Far less class specific, as travel becomes more and more accessible, and less costly in that sense. More and more people are traveling and writing down their travels, experiencing their travels in different ways. The third thing that I'd like to emphasize is that, travel writers are experimenting with newer kinds of travel, right? For example, there's one form of travel that is being taken place, and that is medical tourism. You have disaster tourism. You have travels to the smaller towns, sorry. You have travels into the interiors of India in Maoist country, and therefore stories which are politically, made out. And finally, you have the travelogues written, as it were, for pilgrimages, which are continuously undertaken. You have travelogues by women. So travel writing has established itself within the Indian print scenario in a very important kind of a way. Of course, there are, these centers of Indian travel. Benares is one, Rajasthan is another, right? So Khajuraho being another, Kerala for its natural beauties, Assam for its, once again, religion and natural beauty, travels to the northeast hitherto, Arunachal Pradesh becoming a destination. So I leave you with that, in that sense that I'm trying to project, travel writing as one of the most important, one of the most, rapidly proliferating genres that have emerged across the different centuries. Indian travel writing emerged with the epics. They underwent a transition during the Middle Ages. We've seen the incursions into India as travels written down. With the advent of colonialism, travel takes on big time, and we have encounters within the, as it were, contact zone autoethnographies. And within post-independence India, travel sort of takes up in a very big way, so that, it establishes itself as a separate literary genre by itself. Now, that has been a rather long session, and fragmented by technology. I'm so sorry for that. But what we have tried to do is we have tried to give you an idea of the multiplicity of Indian travels, of the rich history of Indian travel, the evolution of Indian travels, the landmarks of Indian travels, and the ways that it has changed. So that in the two components of the syllabus that we study, pre-independence and post-independence travel writings, we can take a look at the different and differing concerns of the travel writers and their perspectives, their positionalities. We've covered the theoretical gamut of travel writing. We've looked at issues of selfhood, truth, issues of colonialism, alterity, gender, and we've taken a survey of Indian travel writing so far today. Now, I have missed your questions, of course, because they were written in the earlier chat boxes, which disappeared once my electrical connection was snapped off. So I apologize for not answering your questions today. Anyways, it's been a very long session and I'm almost out of breath. But keep your questions handy, because in this course, we are going to have a large number of luminaries who will be talking about these issues. We have Professor Jayati Gupta next week. I'm very glad to announce that we will have Professor Carl Thompson, who is the author of the New Critical Idiom on Travel Writing and the Routledge Companion, one of the probably the largest names in travel writing scholarship, is agreed to have an interactive session with us. We're going to have Pramod Nair from the University of Hyderabad, and of course, one of our authors, Vishwanath Ghosh, has agreed to be part and parcel of this course and interact with you. So with that, I come to the end of this theoretical module. I'll take 2 days off. And then once again on Tuesday, we will start with the travel writing of Abu Talib, the first text in our syllabus. And we'll take a look at how early travel writing operates within the contact zone. Once again, I apologize for the sort of electrical disturbance. And I promise that your questions will be taken up in our later deliberations. So see you once again on Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. Thank you very much for your participation and have a very good weekend. Thank you.